นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโม ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Everybody is probably familiar with some of the life story of the Buddha and how he was motivated to leave home and practice the Dhamma, particularly because of seeing what we call the Dhammadutta, the heavenly messengers, seeing people who are sick, elderly, seeing funerals, seeing the dead. And the fourth messenger is seeing the samana, the spiritual seeker, the monk or the nun wandering for alms and devoted to meditation. So in a way we're at the moment, in the last couple of years, bombarded by heavenly messages. Because every day we get news about COVID, numbers of people catching it, numbers of people dying. And even the samanas have gone online, so there's more access to Dhamma online these days. Just using the term heavenly messenger is an important thing because it helps us get the right perspective on very ordinary experiences. When you hear the news about somebody you know is ill or elderly or passed away, or you're facing that yourself, this is a messenger. And we say heavenly messenger, really it's a messenger that is helping you. It's not a bad thing, even though these experiences can be very unpleasant and obviously end in death. They're teaching us all the time, even to the last moment of our life, we're learning these messages, and this can be a basis for insight and letting go. And this is one of the miracles of the Dhamma, is that it turns suffering into wisdom and liberation for anyone who's willing to take the message and practice. Ajahn Chah used to have his saying, if you're not dead, make it good. If it's not good, let it die. And this theme runs through his and many of the other forest masters' teachings. Just the sense of birth and death being very ordinary in our existence, but on many levels. It's the physical birth and death of the body, but there's also the birth and death of moments of consciousness. Mental states arise, pass away. And at first glance, like many of Ajahn Chah's sayings, the profound and the mundane is mixed in together. So that his teachings often require many visits. Listen to them or read them many times to draw out ever deepening levels of Dhamma. But when you hear this teaching, if you're not dead, make it good. If it's not good, let it die. At first it could sound a little bit depressing, just the word death, dying, we associate with kind of something very negative, dark, gloomy, when in fact it's actually just truth. It's just the way things are. It's not good or bad, it's just the way things are. And actually hidden within that truth is actually something very positive, with great hope. Because if you can let the bad die, it means it can be ended, it can be abandoned, let go of. So the causes of suffering, what we call the mental defilements, all our intentions, actions rooted in greed, anger, delusion, can be abandoned, they can die. And for the Arahant, never to return. For us, they may return, but like many things, if you keep abandoning, gradually they weaken and they return less often, less intensely. So we suffer less the more we practice. But it's the message that this mind and our experience of life can always improve through the practice. If we're willing to practice, to learn from our own thoughts, perceptions, ideas, and learn from the teaching on cause and result, karma, there's always a way up and out of suffering. Because suffering has a cause, so if you remedy the cause, you abandon the cause, then suffering will end sooner or later. And similarly, there's a path that leads out of suffering to peace, lasting happiness. And if that's developed, that becomes the cause. And then the result is the peace and the happiness. So there's always a way out of suffering. Nothing is fixed, nothing is destined. This is central to the Buddhist teachings. So if you're not dead yet, I assume you're not because you're listening to this, then let the bad, the kilesas, the greed, anger, delusion, let that die. Whenever you notice it, let it go, abandon it. Don't give life to it, don't give sustenance to it. And this is why we come back to practicing, bringing up mindfulness, putting effort into the practice, training ourselves in precepts, practicing generosity, kindness and compassion in daily life. All these aspects of the path have to be developed. But as we do that, the opposites, greed, anger, delusion, start to diminish and fade. So this is why we have this teaching that if you just keep doing it, eventually you'll see results. Eventually you'll be enlightened. How slow, how quick, we don't know. But in one sense, it's just as simple as that. Because one of the delusions we keep falling into, the attachments, the idea of self and the identification with our problems and our sufferings, is that everything we take as a self, it seems fixed when it comes up. So when you get angry, we believe the angry thoughts and we are pressured by the angry feeling, the painful feeling. And unless we establish mindfulness, we feel we should follow those thoughts for whatever reason, whatever thinking we've had, whatever incident or whatever's happened that may have triggered anger. The delusion of self says, this is me, this is mine, my view, my feeling, my thought. We often indulge that and hold on to that for a period of time. And if we haven't established mindfulness, what will happen is it will fade, because like every other mental state, every other emotion, it is temporary, so it fades. But if we haven't established mindfulness and learnt the lesson and seen the impermanent nature and seen the unwholesome nature of anger, for instance, then when it fades, it's not fading in the way of somebody practicing Dhamma who mindfully acknowledges their anger and their unhappiness and lets it go. It fades only to return when the conditions are there again. And of course, if we keep missing it and keep not being aware of it, it gets worse, gets more intense. And we all have this problem in parts of our life, whether it's our family relationships or our workplace or even society, when different things are happening over and over again. Quite often we find ourselves falling into negativity, disappointment, anguish, and especially when we feel we're right, because maybe there is a genuine injustice or something's happened to us or someone we know or some group of people we identify with. There may be a trigger that seems very correct for us to be angry. Something has happened, that's why we're angry. But unless we bring up mindfulness, it becomes a habit. And it comes up easier, more often generally, because of habit. So if you fall into anger because of somebody's behavior, in your workplace, say, then you see them again, you notice it again. It's almost like you start looking for it and then you keep getting irritated. Maybe your anger becomes more intense. So it will start to spill out into your thinking, your words, your behavior. If there's no recognition of what's going on, no investigation or turning inwards, then that habit will tend to keep going and intensify. At some point it may spill out. Some people have big explosions of anger when they just can't stand it anymore. We all could have that, but some people seem to have it more than others. Others, it's more niggling, and they're just suppressing it and dealing with it internally, and then eventually it comes out. Some people get angry and then recover quickly and move on. Other people get angry and hold on, maybe even for years. So depending on our character, the situation, the context, of course, then our experience might vary slightly. But the basis for how anger causes suffering, how it arises, what it does to us, is the Buddha explained very clearly. The central teaching in Buddhism is what we call paticca samuppada, dependent origination. How suffering, birth, aging, sickness and death, and all the suffering we experience, mental stress and suffering, how it arises, what is the causal process, the links that lead to it arising. He explained very well in different ways, and then gave the remedy, how to give rise to the cessation of suffering, because the end of suffering has its cause just as the beginning of suffering has its cause. And so every time you're meditating or bringing up mindfulness or reflecting on the Dhamma, you're really bringing your mind to observe and understand dependent origination, or the causal process for suffering to arise. You're coming to study and learn from that, from your own experience. Even though the words aren't necessarily brought up in your mind, or you're not listening to a monk talking about it, that's what you're doing. All of us have had that experience where you seemingly out of nowhere you're suddenly caught into perhaps a state of suffering, of anguish or fear and anxiety, or strong obsession or addiction that really agitates the mind, makes you feel uneasy inside, and so on. We've all experienced that. And the first thing is you sort of think, where did that come from? Seemed to come out of the blue. You may vaguely be aware of events that triggered it or led up to it, but often it's the feeling it's just suddenly you're afraid, suddenly you're angry, suddenly this strong selfish desire taking over the mind in one way or another. And you have that question, where did it come from? Why is it like this? But of course, the practice of meditation, you're looking more closely in at the arising and passing away of these kind of experiences. Mental formations, sankharas, thoughts arising with feelings, perceptions. This is going on all day long, whether we realize it or not. But as you're bringing up more mindfulness, paying attention to your own mind and your own activity and the way your body and mind are apparent in each moment, then you're starting to reveal this process, causal process, to yourself. But often it's fast, and you can't see each moment or preceding moment to when you got angry. You can, later on you might sort of try and think back and work out what was happening, and that's quite useful also. But in the event, in the moment, Ajahn Chah used to say, it's like you were climbing a tree and you fall down, and you really just can't count the number of branches and twigs and leaves you pass on the way down. It's just, you're up the tree one moment, you slip, and then you're down, bang. All you really know is that it hurts. You're suddenly on the ground with pain. It's that fast. And that's why it seems like, say, anger or fear or greed just comes out of nowhere. Even when you're determined not to fall into greed, hatred, delusion, anger, fear, with all the determination in the world, it still happens, doesn't it? We've probably all had that time when you're walking somewhere that's wet, slippery, on a slope, in a dangerous or slightly dangerous place, and you're being your most careful, but just one moment of loss of mindfulness, and bang, you fall down, and it hurts. What we remember tends to be, the pain and the falling down. And that's useful in a way. It's another one of the heavenly messages. Suffering, even mental suffering, is a heavenly messenger. It's a reminder that we can suffer. We have suffered, we can suffer, we have the potential to suffer. But then the heavenly messenger is pointing us back to the Dhamma, to the truth, and saying, well, you should practice more mindfulness, develop more wisdom so that you can solve this kind of suffering. You can prevent it from happening, or if it happens, you can remedy it more quickly, get beyond it, move beyond it more quickly. And this is the heart of our practice, is developing wisdom and understanding that frees the mind from all kinds of stress and suffering. And what supports wisdom and this understanding arising is mindfulness. This is why we're told over and over again, practice mindfulness, be mindful, bring up the mindfulness, because it's the most useful quality, the Buddha said. It's always going to lead on to good things when you bring up mindfulness. He compared it to the CEO in a business or the Prime Minister in the government. It's the person who sits in the center and has to have an eye on everything. They have to be able to see the detail but also the overview. They have to see what's appropriate from moment to moment, what work is important, what's secondary, what to emphasize, what to leave out. So the Prime Minister has to check, the Finance Department, the Justice Department, the Health Department, Civil Service. They have many areas that they oversee. Mindfulness is like that. You start by bringing up mindfulness, which is why when we meditate we often just use a simple object to train in mindfulness, like the breath. But that's not the end of the story. You're bringing your mindfulness up, and then mindfulness allows wisdom, clear comprehension and wisdom to come into the picture, to be active and consider things and understand what's important at this very moment in this situation. And each situation is different, so mindfulness allows wisdom to adjust, and then you can make choices and respond to things correctly, and you maintain your goal of developing the path for liberation, ending suffering. So mindfulness may simply be, in the beginning, may simply interrupt a flow of thought that's leading to suffering. You're getting angry in a situation, but you bring up mindfulness at that moment, and it's, you see the pain, maybe the tension in your body, the negativity of your thoughts, the possible outcome of following your thoughts through, however bad they are, and it interrupts that train of thought, and that maybe stops you saying or doing something, or even stops you continuing with that train of thought, and you say, no, this is no good, let it go. Or maybe brings up some useful remedy. So in the case of anger, mindfulness says you need to direct your mind back to kindness. Be patient with this situation or this person. Develop the kindness. Think of the good in them. And this is something we can all do, but it's whether you have the mindfulness and you train the mindfulness to do that, to be there so that it can direct wisdom. Wisdom can see what will work in this situation to let go. So for monks, a lot of the Buddha's analogies, similes were based around the monk's life. So we have the one of the monk establishes mindfulness and looks for the wholesome Dhamma in that situation, rather than following the unskillful Dhammas and holding on to them. So with anger, he gave this picture of a monk going along the road looking or ready to find pieces of cloth to make robes, because that's how in the old days, monks survived. In the old days, there wasn't factory-made cloth being offered to monks in large pieces like today. Today we're lucky. Good fortune of the materially affluent society that the world has become. In the old days, monks had to collect scrap cloth or pull cloth off corpses. If you've ever done that, it's quite a tough job. Take cloth that has been wrapped around a corpse before a cremation. In a few places it's still practiced, but they would pull the cloth off the corpse. It's soiled by the corpse, and they put it on a tree branch nearby. The cremation would happen, then afterwards monks could come and take that cloth because no one else wanted it. Or they would go into the rubbish grounds or just collect cloth that had been abandoned, discarded by the side of the road. And they'd take it back and clean it up. So imagine a monk who walks along the road and finds a little piece of cloth. And a road is a place people go back and forth. Animals in the old days would go back and forth. So animals would poo and urinate on the road. People would spit on the road. So that piece of cloth the monk finds might be quite unpleasant, smelly, dirty. And the Buddha said this is like you when you're angry with someone else. Your literally your features go like that, and you become repulsed by the thought of that person, what they've said, what they've done. It shows in your features maybe, and your thinking reflects it. So you see that person or you remember that person, and this cycle of dependent origination kicks in. You start thinking angry thoughts and have tension in your body, maybe unpleasant feelings as well. But as you bring up mindfulness, you're interrupting that process. You're sticking a stick into the spokes of it. So the wheel stops for a moment with mindfulness. And you keep mindful, then you're interrupting the process, and then the mind can say, turn to the thought of goodwill, abandon your anger, because anger is leading to suffering. So the Buddha's instruction was, think of that person you're angry with like that piece of cloth the monk finds on the track, dirty, smelly, that nobody else wants. Just like anger, when the object of your anger is something you don't want, and you may want to even destroy, you certainly want to get rid of it, you may want to destroy it depending on the intensity of your anger. It could be a person, animal, a situation, a place. Anger can have many objects, or it could be directed back at the idea of ourself as well. But in that moment, anger is negative, destructive. So you have to pause with mindfulness and say, where's the good in this? The heavenly messenger of anger has come teaching you to try harder, you might say. Bring up mindfulness. Look for the object of metta, goodwill in your mind at that moment. And the monk takes a stick and picks up the bit of cloth on the ground, or if it's a corpse cloth, you pick it off the tree. I've done it before, and you don't, bundle it up and hold it close to you. You keep it at arm's length because it smells and it's dirty. If you pick it out of the road, maybe use a stick to pick it up, keep it at arm's length, and you take it back to the monastery and start cleaning it up. That's like you approach the object of your anger carefully. You give it consideration, you're on guard, you're mindful because it's soiled, it's dirty, and as in the case of the cloth, or because that object will stir up more anger if you think of it unwisely. We say give it unwise attention, ayoniso manasikara. So you have to approach the whole thing with mindfulness, with caution, heedfulness, and start looking at how to find some common ground with that object so your mind becomes more normal again and abandons its anger. So with the cloth, it's go away, scrub it, boil it, use soap, powder, sun it as a disinfectant, and maybe do that many times until the cloth is somewhat clean and you can use it, maybe sew it into a robe, and you still have to dye it as well. There's a lot of work to be done. It's a process. Anger is like that, isn't it? You unless you're already good at it and you've done it a lot, you can't just abandon it just like that. You have to work at it. So the practice of meditation is often called gammatana. It's the basis for your work. It's a kind of work. It's a kind of job you do. What job do monks do? Well, they do gammatana. They do meditation, training their mind to abandon greed, anger, delusion. So it's a job. And that job may take time. It's a task, and you keep applying your mind to it. So like you keep scrubbing the cloth to get it clean, you have to keep putting your attention on the object of your anger and changing your way of looking at it, and seeing that just holding on to the angry feeling and reacting to the angry feeling with negative thoughts and trains of thoughts and building up views and opinions based on that, it's just endless suffering. There's no end to it, as long as you keep repeating that. Now your job is to bring up the mindfulness, interrupt the process and put it into reverse. Your aim is to go into reverse for the cessation of suffering. That's the job of gammatana. You're going towards the cessation of suffering. So what have you got in common with that person you don't like that brings up anger when you think of them or meet them? You have to look for something in common, or something that calms your anger down and makes you look at them in a different light. As well as seeing anger itself as an experience of suffering, you're also looking at the object with different eyes. So the Buddha said, well, try and find the good in them, even if they've only got a tiny, tinsy, eeny-weeny bit of good in them, which is how it feels when you're angry with someone. They will probably have some good that you know about. Because if you're angry with someone, usually it's a sign that you have close contact and experience with that person, especially someone in your workplace you've been angry with over and over again. And you may, because of your bias, what we call akati, you have dosakati, a bias of anger in your mind that's built up, it's become an attachment, it's what you're identifying with. You miss all the good stuff. And quite often people who make us angry also have their good side. We just haven't noticed it, heard about it, thought about it. On the very most basic level, we have the common humanity, is that anyone you meet in this world, or even animals, even little animals that you don't like snakes and scorpions, everything wants to live, everything wants success, happiness, everything hates pain. There's no difference, because that's just the nature of a living, breathing being. They don't want pain. So on that level, you have something in common even with your worst enemy, or your mild enemy, or your occasional enemy, or your friend who you've just fallen out with briefly. It doesn't matter who it is. You have something in common with everyone. And this is why it's possible to develop the thought of loving kindness or compassion to the point of one-pointedness, where all anger disappears, whoever one is encountering or whoever is in the world, however bad they are. And of course, many people have done very evil, bad things, of course, but here you're retreating from your anger and looking back at the world, people, events, from the eyes of place of mindfulness and wisdom. And seeing we all have something in common. We all want happiness. We all have to experience birth, aging, sickness and death. And of course, sometimes one gets a revelation. There may be somebody who you're very angry with, but actually you realize, oh, I've done a lot of good, and my anger is maybe more my problem than their problem. Ajahn Chah had many, many disciples, monks, nuns, lay people, from all around Thailand, all around the world before he died. And it's not like none of them ever got angry with him. But his mindfulness and compassion and wisdom was so well established. We believe, we don't know, Ajahn Chah and everyone else has to know for themselves, but we believe he didn't suffer with anger, even though other people might get angry with him. Someone in a position like that, a leader, teacher, will sometimes say or do things that brings up anger in their students. And it's not a deliberate intention, it's simply the fact of running a place or leading groups of people. You can never please everybody all the time and do things exactly the way they want all the time. That's why living in a Sangha we have a lot of rules and practices helping to maintain harmony and cooperation, developing mutual respect, forgiveness, because in the Sangha you often live as a group, so you need these qualities to live successfully, help your meditation. But still it's possible sometimes you can unconsciously or without knowing contribute to someone becoming angry. And even just saying the truth sometimes can lead somebody to become angry. And we tell people, we say even anger itself, we say, don't get angry, you're suffering when you're angry, and they say, I know I'm suffering, but don't tell me, I don't want to hear that. Because they're so angry, it's hard to hear the words. So even speaking the truth, we can unwittingly be prompting anger in someone else. It happens, but those people all have good in them as well. Especially in a monastery or on a retreat, there'll be plenty of good things happening as well, but yet still anger can arise. But the Buddha encouraged us to train in wise reflection based on mindfulness and seeking a way to abandon greed as well as anger. Abandon all craving, all attachment. And the only way to abandon it is right there where it's arising. It's not something we have to do in the future. That hasn't happened yet. And you may be planning your New Year's resolution for a couple of days' time. This year I'm really going to try, I'm really going to do it. Well, what about today? You don't need to wait for New Year's Day, you do it now. As the place of practice is right here and right now. And so Ajahn Chah used to say, you practice abandoning anger right now, where it's arising. Bring up the mindfulness, let it go, bring up the kindness and tolerance instead. Where there's greed or selfishness, you abandon it right there. You let it die right there. Because it can die, because it's impermanent. It's not something you do in the future when you get your meditation together and when things are right, then you'll do it. You have to do it right here, right now. Because the alternative is it continues. The cycle of dependent origination continues, doesn't it? It goes into another round and another and another, and it just tightens. Ajahn Chah said it's like a screw tightening down. When you make some furniture or something and you need to hold two pieces of wood or something together, you use a screw and you use a screwdriver and you tighten it down. That's like the cycle of dependent origination, creating craving, causing craving, attachment, the sense of self, and the screw tightens down, it gets tighter, and you identify with it more strongly if we do nothing about it. But then practicing in reverse, meaning establishing mindfulness, bringing up wise reflection, letting go of greed, anger, delusion, is like loosening that screw. The sense of self-identity is being loosened every time you establish mindfulness, every time you look on your experience with some wisdom and let go, if only a little bit, if only temporarily, of some greed or some anger, delusion. That screw is being loosened. And so, there's a relief as you're loosening this sense of self and the tight attachment you have on your reactions and your thoughts and your identification with perceptions. As that's being loosened, it's liberating. There's a release, there's a relinquishment, there's a letting go, this peace arises because of it. That's why forgiveness is such a useful quality at, say, New Year's time. You can still use New Year's time even though you haven't reached it yet, but you can still use the concept. It's a time we say forgive and forget, let go of the past, and particularly the baggage of grudges and hatred and bad memories and bad feelings towards people or yourself. It's a time to forgive and let go. And this is paticca samuppada in practice, isn't it? Forgiveness really means letting go, not dwelling on the past, not sticking with that old way of negative thinking, not sticking with the perception, I hate them, I don't like them, I want to get them back. It's releasing or unwinding that screw and saying, I'll forgive to heal my own mind from anger so I can be at peace. And this is independent of that other person. If it is, there's a person who's the cause or the perceived cause of your anger. This is independent of them, because often we have another thought comes up and say, well, I shouldn't forgive them because they've harmed me. They need to be punished, they need to be told. But if you're burning with anger, you need to let go of your anger to be free of anger and be free of suffering. They have to practice for themselves, you have to do your part. Then we say, well, if I let go of anger, it makes me weak, and they're not changing, they're just going to keep doing it. I need to teach them a lesson, stop them. Well, letting go of anger doesn't mean to say you can't act in skillful ways to improve your workplace or your family or your relationship. You've still got plenty of choices and options available to you. It's just you're taking out the immediate suffering of anger out of your mind by doing this practice. You're reducing or reversing the cycle of dependent origination. And ultimately what that's doing is reducing future causes of suffering. We say future lives. You hear this teaching, why they say when somebody is a stream enterer, they've entered the stream of Dhamma, cultivated sila, samadhi, panya, they've reduced the amount of greed, anger and delusion in their mind, and they enter the stream, they call them a stream winner or stream enterer, and they have a maximum 7 life. From this life they're living no more than 7, they'll reach enlightenment, and after that no more life, no rebirth for the Arahant. Why is there a number that you can put on it, or a Sakatagami, only a once returner? It's because this cycle of paticca samuppada has been interrupted so many times that greed, anger and delusion has been weakened. It's not all gone yet. The Sotapanna still has greed and anger, but it's weakened to the point where it's on the way out, it's fading, and the practice of insight, vipassana, is established. So they're not going to keep reinventing the wheel, to bring in another phrase. You know, reinventing the wheel is setting the wheel of paticca samuppada, dependent origination, in motion again. Now they're not doing it, they're going in reverse. They're letting go of anger from mindfulness, wise reflection, seeing the suffering of it, letting go of greed and attachment, seeing the suffering of it. So they've got a time limit now on how much more they have to suffer. So the Buddha said, the suffering of a Sotapanna, stream winner, is equivalent to the amount of dirt you might have under your fingernails if you scratch them on the ground. The suffering of an unenlightened person is equivalent to all the earth, all the mud, the dirt in the world. It's that different. So a Sotapanna still has some suffering, but not much, and not for much longer. It's because the paticca samuppada has been put into reverse, irreversibly. They're not going to go back to reinventing the wheel and creating suffering out of experience again. They're doing the opposite now. They're letting go of suffering and its causes by establishing mindfulness. And you can do it. People can do it. They do it every day. And it's not like you're some amazing meditator and special person. Every day you meet people who have worked with themselves to let go of anger towards another person to the point where it just stops, doesn't arise. They may not be totally free from anger, but in a certain context, with a person or a situation, they have abandoned it. Or fears and anxieties about certain things in their life, they've done it, they've abandoned it. Or greed and attachment for certain things, addictions have been ended, certain kinds of desires abandoned. People do this every day, and what they're doing is actually putting the cycle of dependent origination into reverse by developing the right qualities, the determination, the wisdom, the effort, the mindfulness, the wisdom, the insight, and they abandon certain mental defilements. There may be more to work on, of course, but it's not a never-ending process. There's an end to this. The Buddha taught the end of suffering. He didn't say there's a never-ending process for practitioners. It just feels like that. It can be quite frustrating and you get weary of it, but there's an end to it. That's another message of hope. It's not like you practice and you're always going to suffer. You practice and there's an end of suffering in sight. But you have to keep doing it. So, there's a little bit of time left this morning, and we can carry on practicing sitting mindfully until we hear the bell.